Well, at the risk of having a rather musty experience this particular Memorial Day, I salvaged my grandfather's Roll of Honor from World War I. It was part of the material that I had stored out in our shed, along with all the artwork that I've made over the last 30 years. Now, over the course of the winter, nature and negligence took a toll on a number of pieces, and today I've elected to set them on fire and watch them burn up. I salvaged quite a few pieces, but there are a number that are past that point. So part of the examination of what I'm doing today is setting these old paintings on fire. And it probably won't happen until later today. In the meantime, I've got this roster of Granddad's National Guard service, which has been damaged before, and I just added to it. Both grandfathers, this being Memorial Day, served in the World War, one in the Navy and the other as an Army private in the field artillery. My granddad on my father's side served with Harry Truman. And Harry Truman, of course, being a president, kept up with the boys from Independence, and helped them out where he could in business and commerce, one thing and another. And my grandfather in particular started a roofing career. And Truman helped him along in the unions. And he became a big union guy in Kansas City, and then World War II came along and he got the contract to roof over the Army Air Corps hangars in the Southwest Air Corps bases. My dad at the time was getting his civil pilot license, got just out of high school, and he worked with Granddad for a while and then realized it was a pretty hot job being up on a roof. Decided to join the Navy and became a Navy aviator. He served for near 30 years in the Navy and flew all kinds of prop planes, and we spent our life moving around as a family, and got an education in geography, which most Americans have to go to war to find a better sense of. I served in Vietnam, and I had pretty good duty. I stayed in Texas for 2 years, learning the language of Vietnamese, and not only Vietnamese, but Hanoi dialect. So I had a year in El Paso as a language student, then almost the best part of another year in security school. And then I went to Vietnam in November of '69. And came back November '70. Got out same day. And so that's pretty good duty for all that disparagement that the war has arrived with over time. A number of us don't go to the VA. We don't have anything to do with the American Legion or the Veterans of Foreign Wars. It took me 10 years to decide to finally take up the health care at the VA. And in Buffalo, anyway, it's a pretty progressive outfit. So at this point, I've spent the morning culling out the best work, and I think we should probably move to the shed and get a look at some that I've saved. I saved some collages out of the group. We'll look at some of those later. So the damage, of course, snow and rain and everything came in and really ruined this side of the shed. I'm hoping to dry it out and save the wood from mold. So everything's been moved over. There's probably about 200 pieces here, large and small, and start out, I guess, back in probably 1990, maybe a few earlier in the 80s, a few in the 70s, but mostly it's over the last 30 years since we moved up to Buffalo. I used to keep them in a barn my ex-wife had out in Horseswinney, PA. You know, she put her work out there, I put mine out there, and at some point I got a truck and went and retrieved them, but a lot of those had been pigeonized. So this is a painting that's probably going to have to, I don't know, maybe I can keep this one. It's a little bit damaged. But it comes from the earthquake and the tsunami that happened in Japan in 2014, and I responded to that by making a few paintings of submerged things. I work with natural disasters a lot in my thinking about how to come up with images. Sometimes they're more stylized, sometimes they're looser, they maybe more metaphysical. This one has a look of the ocean and a bubble over the ocean that's sort of a thought bubble, but it's blank, as if an answer is needed for taking responsibility for the ocean. There's a piece over here that's a couple of juniper trees, and that's down in Appalachia. It's just off by ex-father-in-law's farm. Number of different things. This one's a kind of odd piece, but I used charcoal or burned wood as an aspect of civilization deteriorating. The burning's already happened, and so now all the charred wood is rushing in this great wave toward the land. This one's damaged a little bit so it'll dry out and I'll have to clean that up. Storage is what you can afford. And when we moved out here, that was something we took on faith that this shed would be substantial enough. Now, from a future, we're going to put a sandbag on this side and then close the doors and put a sandbag on the other side and see if that will help retard some of the issues of the winter. Any questions that you might have before I stumble on out here into the heat of the Memorial Day weekend? Or do you think it's better just to remain mute and not be more than the camera? So I'm going to work with this one, get it cleaned up, and that should be able to save it. We have decided that if you keep things in plastic, they have a better chance of surviving. So from now on, we're going to wrap everything in plastic and make sure it's off the floor. So there's a lot more industry that's going to be involved in keeping this remaining artwork in good order. This piece is salvageable. This was from a show at Art Space about 5 years ago. And I think what I'll do is just cut it off here, save this part. I don't know what I'll do with that part. But it's an image of a ship that's all sails, but they look more like masks. So I thought A Ship of Masks is the name of this one. And this is before the pandemic had anything to do with this. This is on, as you can see, it's damaged down below, but it's on IKEA tabletops, which were really, really good surfaces to work on. And you'd find those in the city just tossed out on the street. Here's another one, much heavier. And it's going to be thrown in the fire because there's it's damaged beyond, unless I can save the upper half, and I don't know if I feel like that. This one is goes all the way back to graduate school, or gradual school as we call it. And I was doing these kind of rude looking heads, sort of sculptural forms of heads, kind of like Easter Island or something. We'll try to save that one because it's an archival piece. All right, we can let this dry out as best it's going to. I'll take this one over to the burn. Now we can go over and sit under the tree. So to continue the connection with Granddad and my father, I did go into the service in '67. I was interested in writing in school, and I thought, well, this would be the big adventure of the '60s. One of them being the counterculture, the developing issues around civil rights and the anti-war movement that I was in, and then at the same time dropping out of college and being eligible for the draft. But in the course of things, I traveled a lot and got back to the East Coast from a trip to California and found a plane ticket waiting for me to go join my family in Belgium. And when I got there was my induction notice. So my dad said, well, if you don't want to be drafted, we can see if we can get you enlisted over here. The idea was to stay in Belgium, work for the American embassy while Dad and his fellow officers got together and made a proposal that I be enlisted while I was in Europe. So that worked out in about 3 months, and then it was November '67, and I was sworn in at a former Luftwaffe base that had turned into an American helicopter base. And Dad stood up with me while I took the pledge as a enlisted soldier. So things worked out. I became a linguist, went to Vietnam. I wrote about it, and I still write about it. But I wasn't interested in art. I did a few illustrations. I did a few cartoons. I made some storyboards for a guy who was interested in film, making films, and just peripheral things. And then I had a roommate in the course of a year there in country, and he said, well, he dropped out of Rhode Island School of Design. He said, if you want to get back into civilian life, as we all did, the best way is through art school. Because he says, people will leave you alone. You're a little older than most students, and the teachers will tend to gravitate to you because you're closer to their age. And it's an easy way to slide back into life. So I did that. I got back to the States and immediately applied to RISD, which I thought was a terrific art school, but they wanted me to have a summer refresher course in a number of subjects, and it cost too much money, and so I decided not to go there, and got somebody to front me a little bit of opportunity to go to the Maryland Institute, which is just over in Baltimore from where my folks lived in Virginia. So I did get in there. I went for a year, and then a teacher said, well, you're an ex-GI, and you could live pretty comfortably in New York on the GI Bill if you got into Cooper Union, which was his alma mater. So I went and applied to Cooper Union and didn't hear anything, figured I wouldn't get in, and was figuring to spend the summer as a bike messenger in Washington. And last part of August, I get a letter that says, we screwed up. We thought you were somebody else, and now we know who you are, and you're in. So I transferred to Cooper Union. I did a couple of years there and got out and met all kinds of artists there. And old grizzly-looking Greek artists, and Italian artists, and German artists, and then a whole new group of these more contemplative types that came in the 70s that were interested in documenting their artwork with lots of text, and that graduated to things that you plug in and they light up, and so a sort of a sensationalism crept into art in the 70s, and a lot of the abstract expressionists kind of evolved into second and third generation abstract expressionism, and then the representational artists were interested in portraiture and in local color, things that looked like they ought to look. They were up against each other, and they would have these ridiculous conversations about what was the strength of art in the modern world. Was it an abstraction? Was it these sort of metaphysical meet you halfway paintings, or was it literal translation of reality? Well, I don't know if that's ever been settled, but I decided to split it down the middle. So my works kind of turns out to be semi-abstract, based on process and based on just a kind of an enthusiasm for seeing where things will go in the course of working on it. And a lot of painters don't have a real descriptive background for their work, you know. And one thing I did while I got a job down in Texas teaching at the University of Texas at one point in the 80s, and I had a coursework that was called Writing for Artists, to try to at least give artists some kind of articulation about what they did, even if ultimately they didn't post it on the wall next to their work. At least they could fill out forms for grants and try to get a sense of how to apply for a teaching job, which is all there were for artists in the 80s. I don't know what else you want to know, but maybe something about materials. Well, glad you asked. Materials in New York, when I moved to New York and went to Cooper Union, was just the street. The street was materials. Soho hadn't happened yet. And there were just whole blocks long of dumpsters that were throwing out everything from these factories that later became these impossibly expensive lofts. And you would just walk through that mess of stuff and find what you wanted and track it back to your loft, work on it, and it became a motif, just whatever the street gave. Even now, when I pick up something from a lay-by on the road, I feel like I should have a bumper sticker that says, "I break for rectangles," because people throw away tabletops and hollow core doors, and it's great work to a working surface. And over the course of these 30 years, I've used the cheapest materials, the throwaway paint, the paper that comes left over on the roll from a printing firm. All the work that I've done is, it sort of is damaged before I get it, in a way. And I feel like whatever energy was in it, for whatever purpose it had, I'm trying to add to that energy by making a painting from it. It wasn't my intention to stay up here, but that was in 1990. It came up after teaching in University of Texas in Austin, and had a wife and baby, and camped out at my parents' place in Virginia for a while, and then decided to come to Buffalo to see if I couldn't get into a secondary educational situation as a high school art teacher. Courtesy of my then mother-in-law, who had an apartment that we could stay in, and I did that. In 1990, we came up, lived with her. I got work in the SUNY system as an art teacher, covering people's sabbaticals. Somewhere along the line, that marriage went apart, went up to pieces, and then very quickly it had another marriage. That one lasted 14 years. And then that one came apart, and I stayed up here for the sake of the children. That would be like 4 children by that time. By 1996, straight on into 2003. This is my grandfather's christening gown. A little piece here on a collage, cut from a photograph. He had an interesting life. He was a sailor in the Navy and an aircraft mechanic, and worked on the NC-4 that in 1919 did a round the world trip with these seaplanes, and he was a mechanic on the crew. He didn't make the trip. He worked on the planes back on the Navy base in San Diego. This one is a collage I did in 2010, I guess. It's kind of beat up now. It's called Parenthood. And it's just pieces of a magazine illustration that it's as if there's this floating world. There's books which are floating off the edge of a table, and some other books, and a frame of a painting, and then these hands that are sort of nurturing in expression, and some dolphins, a family of dolphins. So it's just things I put together, and it actually has more meaning for me now than it did when I made it. Having been a parent for all these years, and a negligent parent for some of them, it has a lot of emotional effect, as if we're all just floating through our existence with little touchstones here and there, nurturing hands of our own parents, and some of the costumes of religious sympathy, and then education with books, and then art just kind of falling off on the edge of a table, everything kind of in a blue haze. So these collages got started 2010, 2012. I had a show, different things that I was interested in, some more metaphysical than others, curiosities of perspective and curiosities of figurative things that I would never paint. I was able to get some imagery out of magazine illustrations. That one's damaged, I can see. This one I don't think so. Damaged. This is one that was in a show called, what is it called? I don't have a label on it. But it was at Betty's restaurant in Buffalo. And it shows a lot of trash at the bottom, and a sort of swampy scene with a boat and a guy driving by with a megaphone and a bicycle and all that. Now, a lot of these started out as secondhand store reproductions, and then I just added stuff to them. Like this one was all about ducks, woodland, stuff that I didn't want to have to paint. So I just took the energy of whatever that reproduction was and added all this detritus. I tried to save this one. This is a very small piece. It's called rooftop pool. And yet there's some anxiety building over here with a gas can, and something has crashed and landed there and doesn't seem to have affected the kids in the inner tube. But I don't know why she's bent over like that, but there she is. Rooftop pool. These were fun. These were a lot of fun. Painting is not the same kind of fun. It's not the same kind of investigation that having stacks of magazines and going through and finding hands and finding different ways to create these kind of incoherent scenarios. I don't know what they are exactly. At the time, interested in hands and feet, issues that are disconnected from the body. This one was one that somebody asked me if they could use it as a cover for a book they wrote. So I gave them permission to use it. It's another situation with a burning ice cream truck over here, which is, ironic, I guess. Newspapers all held down with rocks on one side, and a deer over here. Sort of nature is on one side, and publishing and man's need to know on the other side. And then a guy carrying a couple of suitcases who's looking over here at this house. And everything was here initially, woodscape and so forth, and I just added a few things. What I wanted to do eventually was to make collages that looked like photographs by just putting things together that looked like a reasonable scene that you would accept as in its entirety rather than as a collaged experience. In this case, it's called Documenta, and it's Chinese, some kind of a protest that's also laid out with rocks, similar to when that was kept down from the wind by putting rocks on things. So that's a few collages that survived, and real happy about those. It's curious that in this nature versus negligence issue with the shed, that a lot of the things that didn't survive I didn't like that much anyway. So I was pleased that I could shit can them over there and not miss them all that much. I sort of miss the symbol of them, but the idea that you would actually do work and not care for it any better than I have. And I think maybe that's an example of sort of the way I've handled life as well. That there's a natural progression of expectations, but there's always a little doubt involved. Did I do enough? Are they protected? Does it make sense to spend a little more money to be a little more secure? Does anything matter in the end? Or if you get bee traps, is it going to help your enjoyment of your deck? And even though you lose a few bees, there's an iffiness to my life that has always been there. I know once my brother and I, we used to do a lot of Army play and set up these sort of military constructs, in the garage and in the backyard. And in some of the places we lived, and we always lived off the Navy base because my dad didn't really want us overly influenced by military wherewithal. So we'd live in a housing area somewhere and Maybe there's a forest behind us. Maybe there's just a big construction ditch, whatever. And we were out playing one time, and I said, we're going to use this little ravine here to rappel across. And I was 8, I think. I was making this determination, and he would be 4, because he's 4 years younger than me. And we had some rope, and I said, now I'm going to pretend that I lassoed the stump on the other side of this ravine. So I went under the ravine, climbed up, lassoed the stump, made sure it was secure, and then I came back out of the ravine. I said, okay, now we're going to start the little play scene. I want you to rappel across that ravine to the other side while I hold this end. And my brother looked at me and he says, are you sure you can hold it? I mean, that's a ravine, I might fall in it, if you can't hold it. And I said, no, I got this. I'm going to hold the rope, and I couldn't hold the rope. He fell in the ravine right away. I mean, I've thought about that practically every day since it happened, because he was so trusting. And I've always felt like I did him the worst disservice by pretending that I could hold that rope. And I remember him saying as he was crossing and holding on to the rope with his hands and feet, he says, how are you holding it? And I said, I don't think I can hold it, but I'm going to let you down easy into the ravine. And then my hand slipped, and he just goes, it wasn't really very deep, but it was the idea of it. And at 4 years old, he just got up and said, you said you could hold the rope. So I don't know if he ever trusted me about anything after that. It's kind of the reverse sometimes, I think, that the younger brother is actually more on the ball than the older brother. And we reverse roles. But we have a loving relationship, and we don't seem to bear any ill will. He, at one point, came across my knees with a cane pole after we had been sword fighting, and he wanted to quit. And I said, no, come on, we're still knights in King Arthur's court or something. And we had these old fishing poles, these cane poles, and he said, no, I'm done. Right across my kneecaps with this cane pole. And so I laid out there in the grass for a while, holding my slaughtered knees. I guess if with no further questions, we could cut off this section of the legacy video. We have it divided with Pat's on this side, and she does her work in relative seclusion, and I'm on this side. The studio is as big as the one I had at Art Space, essentially. Most of the work is in process. It's either on board or on paper that's been laid on these cradled panels, which are really nice. They have to do with more current events right now, the issue with the war in Europe and how it could be reflected in nature. The idea of flame and just beginning to alight in the canopy of the forest, and that old maxim about can't see the forest for the fire, can't see the forest for the trees. There's another one about falling sticks on fire. Kind of goes back to the wave pressing the burnt sticks toward the shore. Just sort of malevolent issues that arise. This one's called forest bathing. There's a solitary figure sitting in a meditative pose in the forest. I use nature as the kind of stand-in for a stage setting that humans are observing but are not pictured in. So it's like you're observing the scene of these wraithful apparitions in a stream or some kind of body of water. This one too is in the works. It's a smaller one of sticks falling into the ocean, just coming from somewhere, falling out of the sky. It's curious. I think since I started painting on paper, I'm a lot freer in the imagination of how things are arrived at with the process, just hitting the paper with paint and gradually finding something to relate to. This one's titled, People Are Like Wolves, They Bleed on Each Other. These are handy little racks. These are all things you can find at the thrift store. Shoe racks, racks for kids' activity boxes. Different things that I am interested in finding ways to store materials, and these hollow core door shelves. These are very deceptive. This is styrofoam, just a styrofoam packing panel that has been laid paper on and worked directly on. And some of them work better than others. You can't always get the right consistency with a styrofoam. This painting has been so many other paintings, and now it's what it is a landscape of melting glaciers, I guess we could say. This one's another one where there's a little bit of conflagration going on. Just some trees that are alighted in a forest. I think I'll go back into that one again. And this one is about a cliffside in Okinawa, where I was able to take R&R when I was overseas. I went to Okinawa for 10 days and learned all about Suicide Cliff and the ghost forest, which I also use as a metaphor for the natural state of things. Here are some people dropping into the ocean from the Suicide Cliff. Just a little bit of paint that has to stand in for these poor deluded people that thought that the American troops were going to kill them, and they decided to commit suicide before that happened. This one's still being worked on. I've got the forest and building on this side, and I'll put some more up over here. And this is a very recent painting, and it was originally a tree that was on fire, and then I dropped it back to a horizon line and kept the flames and made a landscape in front of it and water in front of that, and now it's 3 burning tanks, which is what the Ukrainians are best at, is blowing up Russian tanks with robotic drones. This piece is just like an ad for shoes, or some poster with shoes on it that's now being set afire from the inside out. So it's called Burning Through. Flame seems to just hold an attention for me right now. It's the opposite side of the fascination with ice. So fire and ice, if you want. You could think of it that way. Got some larger paintings that are still in the works. And definitely want to continue. The larger paintings seem to be the ones that get exhibited more often, because the galleries like just larger scale work. I don't have that many. But this is a downed tree with a root structure showing. At some point I got tired of working on that. I'll start it up again at some point. Usually there's at least 3 paintings going at the same time. It's not that I get bored with the work, but I just am thinking about one while I'm painting the other. So it's a lot of division of labor. And just leaving them alone sometimes for months, and then going back and taking a pull on them is very restorative. Like this painting is one of a car that's been left on the beach and the tide came in. And if you know cars, you can see that's a Citroën D17. And it's nearly submerged. So somebody who likes Citroën cars, they might find an interest in a painting about a submerged Citroën. But it's also about other things. It's about negligence, leaving your car on the beach when the tide comes in. An expensive car makes all the difference. You don't quite say the same thing about a, Ford Taurus. I don't think you would feel the same way about it. This painting is another one about icebergs. I still haven't finished. My interest in that waned. Certain things about icebergs that have carried on since the 80s when I had a gallery in New York. A lot of what I was painting were views of icebergs through the forest. Isn't that curious how the forest keeps kind of takes a point of reference either with the ocean or with a burning tree somehow. This is an unusual painting because it's about ships, and ships corresponding with each other. It's Talk Between Ships is the title. And Talk Between Ships was a way of communicating in the days before there was anything but semaphore with a lantern. And then there was Morse code. And now, of course, there's GPS. Another fascination that's also part of the forest at certain points is a stump. And this stump is a kind of stand-in for the human head, the black stump. Stumps are also a stand-in for just some kind of representational form in a landscape that is otherwise just the sky, an undifferentiated cloud bank or something. But as far as painting goes and exhibiting, I haven't done much of that in the last few years. I've been selling paintings based on the Instagram images that people find they like, and then if I can, I try to get them to come to the studio and see the piece in real time. But in some cases, they're satisfied with the image on the internet, and then I just mail them the painting. The most recent one was sent to California, and it was a thing that is an actual thing that is. It's a forest at the bottom of a lake. And so you have water, you have the trees, and you have that disconnect between the reality of trees growing in the bottom of a glacier lake. I use the same kind of subject matter over time. I know when you made that film of me in my studio, I was working on a waterfall. And the waterfall was not just like a simple cataract. It had half a forest falling into the gorge below. So the sense of it was there was dislocation of natural forces and the calamity that comes with putting too many things in the same space. Trees and water all smashed together. This one's all about fire. I haven't exactly decided whether I want this to be like patches of oil that had caught on fire from a sinking ship, or if it's some other form of flammable material. But it's called fire islands. And islands are also interesting because they are isolated elements in a space of the ocean or the lake surrounding them. Now, if you pan over here to my palette, this is maybe the most unfortunate palette you've ever seen. It's just the worst possible care that I can take with brushes that I've made up from different things. These brushes are actually cosmetic brushes, and then I use a bamboo pole to stick them in and wrap it up so that I can make these corny brushes out of them. But they work really well. A lot of these brushes are they just sit in this scummy water. But all you have to do, just scurf them around a little bit. They're clean. You can work them. But you have to throw that water out once in a while because it really gets stanky. These are all the top of the line acrylic paints. And then, oddly enough, paints that I got from a guy that was cleaning out his basement. They're all acrylic, but some of them are a little bit more toxic than others. And here's some well-used Utrecht acrylics. I use gesso as a lightener of paint. I use regular white titanium acrylic. This is a big pot of black acrylic. I used oil for years and years, and then decided that that was more toxic as an environment, because I also used a distillate wax that was petroleum based, and you needed a cross ventilation with that, and I didn't always have that. was called Dorland's wax. It was wonderful stuff. You could use just a little bit of it and just kind of scurf your brush on the canvas, and it would create a luminescence. I don't want to have anybody sued by tripping over my cardboard floor. This is a painting that was going one way and now it's going another way. This is stuff falling from the sky, no different really than the sticks and all the rest, but I want it to be seen through a woodscape so that these things are all kind of broken up in pieces, and as if you were approaching this scene of devastation behind the woods and onto the sea coast. This is a great space for me because I've got rolling chairs. I can push the chair back and as far as I need to see the artwork. I have a record situation with a CD player and cassettes. Got all my tools laid out here in a fanciful array of tools. 14 different kinds of clamps, which are the marvelous, wonderful invention for an artist. And the overhead that we've got in this place adds about 3 feet to the basement height. And it makes all the difference as far as feeling like you have enough space to create an environment. Some of the stuff that was going on earlier on paper, here's an example. It might be the last example we need down here. It was left as is. I don't exactly know what it's going to be when it's finished, but right now it's a horse with Herman Miller's Aeron chair. And that was a big ad that NPR put on for years. The Herman Miller Aeron chair. One of these ergonomic office chairs. So in a way that's talking about the confines of life within an office or some kind of professional setting, and then the freedom of the rampaging, rearing stallion. And I think it's really interesting that I left it like that. I didn't move it off into something more predictable. Well, what we have here is residue left over from the winter damages. These were paintings a show at Pausa, collage that's also kind of made into a landscape with cutting out certain areas with white and then tinting them so it kind of looks like the sky, but it's not going to be up anymore. It was called ichor. Two meanings. Ichor is a kind of residue of blood, as if blood is rain, and also ichor is where I served in Vietnam. So it's ICHOR. The one under it is called Hare Hunter Field, and it was shown at the Jewish Center on Delaware this past summer. Hare Hunter Field is a psychological test the Nazis gave to people they thought were mentally disturbed if they could make a sentence with the words hare, hunter, and field, they were considered to be of meaningful intelligence. But if they couldn't put them in the right order, then they were sent to concentration camps, or else they were exterminated. So hare, hunter, field was just an open landscape where you might find the hare, the hunter, in the field. Ichor and hare, hunter, field. Some of these little collages didn't make it. This is one that was very early on. It's just cut from photocopy and has a figure standing at a seashore looking out from beyond some kind of rock formation. And some other ones that didn't quite make it. This one's Mount Mount Fujiyama in Japan, of course, with all the little, what they called manga, when manga was about these little tchotchke-like things, little tchotchkes. This one was called Fun with Oranges, and it's damaged. You can see the paper is going to be the first of the destructive artworks, because it will decay rapidly with any moisture. And this thing, I don't know if we'll ever get it burnt or not, but it's there's another collage that's crapped out. But this one was a man-o-war, a giant jellyfish. And that was the idea. It was a giant jellyfish. I don't know, I might be able to save it if I cut it off here, but I don't care for the scale at that point, so I think I'll let it go. Another testament to IKEA tabletops, which you don't find so much of down here in Little Appalachia, in Angola. You don't find that many of them. Well, I guess that's it. I don't think there's anything more to add. Just glad to have finally decided to break with some of these paintings, even though nature did most of it, and my negligence as to how to store them did the rest. Nature and Negligence. Sounds like an interesting film title. Aloha. Vanities of the bonfire.